It began not with a proclamation, but with a silence, an unnatural, suffocating silence inside the private corridors of Windsor. When Catherine, Princess of Wales, emerged from a sealed meeting clutching a single cream envelope, even seasoned aides froze. Something had shifted, something irreversible. And at the center of it all was a letter no one else was meant to see. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The summons itself had come without warning, delivered not through the usual ceremonial channels, but through a quiet, almost urgent request that bypassed layers of protocol. Catherine had been asked to attend a confidential session inside one of the most restricted archival chambers, rooms typically reserved for constitutional materials, sovereign correspondence, and documents deemed too sensitive for routine circulation. Those familiar with palace rhythms immediately sensed the anomaly. Meetings of this nature were rare, and when they did occur, they involved multiple senior figures, not a single royal being called in isolation. Yet on that day, it was Catherine alone who stepped inside. What unfolded behind those closed doors remains shrouded in carefully guarded silence, but insiders whisper that the atmosphere was unlike anything previously recorded within the modern royal framework. Staff members were instructed firmly and without explanation to vacate the vicinity. Doors were sealed. Communication lines were restricted. Even long-serving aides, accustomed to discretion, found the level of secrecy unsettling. At the center of this controlled environment lay a single document, preserved with extraordinary care. Its origins traced back to Queen Elizabeth II, a monarch known for precision, foresight, and an almost unbreakable command of legacy. When Catherine finally emerged, the change was unmistakable. Her composure, so often described as unshakable, appeared momentarily fractured. Witnesses would later describe her expression as pale, focused, and deeply affected, as though she had been entrusted with something far heavier than ceremonial duty. She did not speak. She did not linger. Instead, she moved with quiet urgency, the envelope held firmly, as if its contents demanded immediate protection. And almost instantly, the palace seemed to respond. Internal communications tightened, conversations lowered to whispers. The usual rhythm of royal operations slowed under an invisible weight. It didn't take long for speculation to begin its quiet spread through the corridors. At first, it was dismissed as routine, another procedural matter, another archive note. But that explanation quickly unraveled. The level of containment, the deliberate isolation, the unmistakable shift in Catherine's demeanor, none of it aligned with routine protocol. Reports began to surface, cautiously framed, suggesting the document was not merely historical, but directive in nature. A legacy instruction, some called it. Others described it as something far more consequential, a piece of guidance intended not for the past, but for the future. And perhaps most striking of all was the question no one could openly ask: why her? Why was Catherine chosen as the sole recipient of something originating from the late Queen herself? In a system defined by hierarchy, where every action follows a structured chain of authority, this deviation was impossible to ignore. It hinted at intention, at design, at something carefully orchestrated long before that moment ever arrived. And as the whispers grew louder, one truth became impossible to dismiss: the letter was not just a message, it was a signal. But what stunned the palace even more wasn't the existence of the letter, it was who had been deliberately excluded from it. Long before her passing, Queen Elizabeth II was said to have prepared for every conceivable crisis. But few imagined she had left behind something so precise, so personal, and so dangerously selective: a letter addressed not to the heir, but to Catherine alone. To understand the weight of that revelation, one must first understand the system the Queen quietly perfected over decades, a system built not on spectacle, but on control, foresight, and silent authority. Those who worked within palace walls often spoke, in careful tones, about the red box tradition, a ritual of sealed documents, daily dispatches, and confidential directives that governed the monarchy's inner machinery. But beyond those daily papers existed something far more elusive: documents not meant for immediate action, but for future reckoning. Letters prepared not for the present monarch, but for moments the Queen believed would test the very fabric of the institution itself. And it is within this shadow system that Catherine's letter is believed to belong. Reports suggest that the document in her possession was dated during the Queen's final months, a period already surrounded by quiet urgency and deliberate preparation. Those close to royal administrative circles have hinted that during that time, the Queen became increasingly focused on safeguarding continuity, ensuring that the monarchy would remain stable even under pressure. But what makes this letter extraordinary is not just its timing, but its framing. It was not described as reflective or personal, not a message of affection or farewell. Instead, insiders whisper that it carried a tone of instruction measured, deliberate, and unmistakably purposeful. This was not a letter meant to comfort. It was a letter meant to guide. And then comes the question that has unsettled even the most seasoned observers. Why Catherine? Why not King Charles III, the direct successor? Why not Prince William, the future of the crown? The monarchy has always functioned through a clear line of authority where communication flows downward through rank and responsibility. Yet this letter appears to defy that structure entirely. Various interpretations suggest that the Queen saw in Catherine something distinct, not just a future queen consort, but a stabilizing force, someone positioned uniquely between tradition and transition. Others believe it may have been a strategic move, placing sensitive guidance in the hands of someone less entangled in immediate power struggles. But no matter the reasoning, the choice itself speaks volumes. There are also whispers, cautious and unconfirmed, that the contents may intersect with private royal trusts, those complex and often opaque structures that manage estates, assets, and long-term financial stewardship. If true, this would elevate the letter from symbolic gesture to something far more consequential, touching the very foundation of royal legacy. Palace archivists, bound by strict confidentiality protocols, have remained silent, their discretion only fueling speculation further. The less that is confirmed, the more the mystery deepens. And so, the letter exists in that unsettling space between history and intention, a document rooted in the past, yet clearly designed to shape the future. Its presence alone has already begun to shift perceptions, raising questions that cannot easily be answered, and tensions that cannot easily be dismissed. Because in a system built on order, even the smallest deviation can signal something far larger at play. And as word quietly reached the king, the reaction was not one of comfort, but of visible unease. When King Charles III reportedly learned of the letter's existence, insiders suggest the moment was anything but calm. This was not just a private message, it was a shift in authority, one that seemed to bypass him entirely. By the time the information reached him, the sequence itself had already raised quiet alarms. Catherine had received the document first. She had read it, absorbed it, and left that sealed chamber carrying something no one else had yet been permitted to see. Only afterward, according to various interpretations circulating within palace circles, was the king made aware. That order, subtle but unmistakable, introduced a tension that could not easily be dismissed. In a monarchy defined by hierarchy, timing is everything. And in this case, timing suggested something unusual, something deliberate, something that did not entirely follow the expected chain of command. Those close to the inner workings of the institution began to ask questions carefully, almost cautiously. Was this a personal letter, outside the reach of constitutional relevance? Or did it carry implications that extended into the realm of royal authority itself? The distinction mattered more than it seemed, because if the letter contained guidance that influenced decisions, roles, or future actions, then it occupied a space that blurred the line between private intention and institutional direction. And that is where the unease began to deepen. Different interpretations of the late Queen's intent quickly emerged, each more complex than the last. Some suggested that this was simply an extension of her long-standing habit of preparing for contingencies, ensuring that key figures were equipped with insight when the time came. Others believed it reflected a deeper concern, a recognition that the monarchy would face pressures requiring a steady, unifying presence beyond the immediate authority of the reigning sovereign. And then there were those who viewed it as something far more strategic, a quiet redistribution of influence, carefully executed through discretion rather than declaration. For Charles, the challenge was not merely emotional, though there are whispers that it carried that weight as well. It was political. It was structural. It was about navigating a situation where tradition demanded clarity, yet circumstance offered none. His inner circle, according to those familiar with the discussions, did not present a unified response. Some urged restraint, emphasizing the importance of respecting the Queen's wishes without amplifying speculation. Others questioned the precedent being set, concerned that even the perception of bypassed authority could introduce instability into an already delicate framework. History, of course, provides its own quiet echoes. Monarchs have, at various moments, left behind instructions intended to guide future generations' letters, decrees, and personal directives that carried influence long after they were written. But rarely, if ever, have such documents surfaced in a way that intersected so directly with the present balance of power. And that is what made this moment so uniquely charged. It was not just about honoring the past. It was about interpreting it in real time, under the weight of expectation, scrutiny, and uncertainty. Because beneath the surface of protocol and tradition lies a more fragile reality, the monarchy survives not only on rules, but on perception, trust, and continuity. And any shift, however subtle, has the potential to ripple outward in ways that cannot be easily controlled. The letter, unseen by most, had already begun to reshape conversations, influence behavior, and alter the quiet dynamics within the palace walls. It had introduced a question that no one could yet answer, but everyone could feel. But the deeper shock wasn't about protocol, it was about what the letter actually contained. Those familiar with the situation whisper that the contents of the letter were not symbolic, they were operational. A directive, a roadmap, and possibly a warning. What makes that realization so unsettling is not just the existence of instructions, but the nature of what those instructions appear to protect. Reports suggest that the document was deeply focused on preservation, on shielding the monarchy's most sacred foundations from erosion, both visible and hidden. This was not about ceremonial duties or public image. It was about the inner architecture of the crown, the invisible framework that ensures continuity through generations. And within that framework, every decision carries weight, every influence leaves a mark, and every misstep risks consequences that extend far beyond the present moment. There are persistent whispers that the letter may have drawn attention to key royal estates, places like Balmoral and Sandringham, yet not in the way they are commonly understood. These were not referenced as residences or retreats, but as enduring pillars of identity, spaces that embody the monarchy's historical and emotional core. If the letter indeed addressed them, then its message becomes clearer and far more serious. It suggests a need for vigilance, a need to protect not just the land itself, but what it represents: the continuity of tradition, the stability of legacy, the unbroken thread that connects past to future. At the heart of these interpretations lies something even more significant: the idea of a guardianship quietly assigned to Catherine, Princess of Wales. Not a title, not an official declaration, but a responsibility implied through tone and intent. Insiders describe it as a role that exists between authority and duty, one that requires balance, restraint, and an almost instinctive understanding of the institution's deeper needs. It is not about power in the conventional sense. It is about stewardship, ensuring that the monarchy remains anchored even as it evolves. But with that responsibility comes boundaries, subtle yet unmistakable. The letter, according to those familiar with its interpretation, does not impose rules outright, but it reinforces limits about influence, about access, about who shapes the direction of the crown and how. These are not restrictions born from conflict, but from caution, rooted in long-standing royal doctrines that prioritize stability above all else. The message, though carefully framed, appears to carry a quiet firmness. The monarchy must remain protected, even from pressures that arise within its own structure. And that may be precisely why the letter was never intended for widespread knowledge. To reveal it fully would risk misinterpretation, tension, perhaps even division. Instead, it was placed in the hands of someone positioned uniquely within the institution, close enough to understand its demands, yet distant enough to act with clarity. This was not about exclusion for the sake of secrecy. It was about precision, about ensuring that its message would be received, interpreted, and carried forward without distortion. Because ultimately, what the letter represents is not just guidance, but foresight, a calculated effort to prepare for challenges that may not yet be visible, but are quietly approaching. And now, as those instructions begin to take shape in real time, the true weight of that foresight is becoming impossible to ignore. And as Catherine began to act on its contents, the ripple effects inside the monarchy became impossible to ignore. Catherine did not speak publicly. She didn't need to, because within days, her actions began to reflect a new level of authority, one that insiders say felt unmistakably deliberate. The shift was not announced, not declared, not even acknowledged in any formal sense. And yet, it was there, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but impossible to ignore once it settled into place. Those who had observed Catherine, Princess of Wales, over the years were accustomed to her measured presence, her careful adherence to protocol, her steady, composed role within the structure of the monarchy. But now, something had changed. Not in her demeanor, which remained calm and controlled, but in the weight behind her actions. There was a precision, a clarity, an unmistakable sense of purpose that had not been there before. Her appearances, while outwardly unchanged, began to carry a different tone. Engagements were approached with sharper focus, decisions were executed with quiet confidence, and interactions within the institution reflected a deeper involvement than many had previously attributed to her role. Reports suggest that she was no longer simply participating, she was influencing. Not loudly, not forcefully, but with a consistency that signaled intent. And those closest to the internal workings of the palace began to notice. What stood out most was her growing presence in conversations that had traditionally been reserved for senior figures within the hierarchy. Discussions about long-term planning, about the direction of the monarchy, about maintaining its stability in a shifting world, these were no longer distant from her. Instead, she appeared increasingly aligned with Prince William, their partnership evolving into something more strategic, more unified. Together, they projected not just continuity, but cohesion, as though responding to something that required not just participation, but leadership. Staff members, careful with their words yet consistent in their observations, began to describe anew clarity in her directives. Instructions were precise. Expectations were understood. There was less ambiguity, less hesitation, and a growing sense that decisions were being guided by a framework that extended beyond immediate circumstances. It was not about control. It was about direction. And that direction seemed to reflect something deeper, something rooted in tradition, yet responsive to the demands of the present. At the same time, there was a noticeable reinforcement of values that have long defined the monarchy: discipline, discretion, duty above all else. These were not new principles, but under Catherine's evolving presence, they appeared sharpened, brought into clearer focus. Some observers had begun to describe her role in new terms, cautiously, almost reluctantly, as though aware of the weight those words might carry. A guardian, they say. Not officially, not formally, but functionally a figure positioned to preserve, to stabilize, to ensure that the institution remains anchored even as it moves forward. And perhaps that is what makes this moment so significant, because authority within the monarchy is rarely about what is declared. It is about what is recognized, what is accepted, what quietly takes shape over time. And in Catherine's case, that shape is becoming increasingly defined, not through words, but through action. But while Catherine stepped forward, others within the palace began to quietly step back. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere inside the palace reportedly shifted overnight. Conversations became cautious, alliances recalibrated, and the presence of that single letter loomed over everything. What had once been a system defined by quiet predictability now carried an undercurrent of tension that few could openly acknowledge, yet many could unmistakably feel. Senior aides, long accustomed to navigating the intricate rhythms of royal protocol, began adjusting their communication channels with unusual care. Messages that once flowed with ease were now filtered, measured, and, in some cases, withheld entirely. Words mattered more. Timing mattered more. And above all, discretion became the unspoken rule governing every exchange. It was not chaos, but it was not normal either. Reports suggest that within days, an internal recalibration had quietly begun to take shape. Not through sweeping announcements or visible restructuring, but through subtle shifts in how decisions were approached, who was consulted, and what priorities were emphasized. Meetings became more selective. Discussions became more focused. There was a growing sense that something foundational was being reassessed, as though the institution itself was adjusting to a new set of expectations that had not been formally declared, yet were already influencing behavior at the highest levels. For King Charles III, the challenge was particularly delicate. As sovereign, he remained the central authority, the figure through whom all official power ultimately flows. And yet, the existence of the letter combined with the quiet shifts it appeared to inspire introduced a complexity that could not be easily resolved through tradition alone. His advisors, according to those familiar with the internal dynamic, found themselves navigating a careful balance. On one hand, there was a need to maintain continuity, to ensure that the monarchy appeared stable, unified, and unwavering. On the other, there was an unspoken recognition that something within that structure had changed, however subtly. This balancing act extended beyond individual decisions and into the broader architecture of the monarchy itself. Because if the interpretations surrounding the letter held any weight, then its implications were not limited to immediate circumstances. They pointed toward a future in which roles, responsibilities, and influence might evolve in ways that had not been fully anticipated. Not dramatically, not disruptively, but gradually, deliberately, with lasting effect. And within that possibility lay both opportunity and uncertainty. Even beyond the palace walls, the shift did not go entirely unnoticed. The media, always attuned to the slightest change in royal patterns, began to sense that something was different. Coverage remained cautious, language remained restrained, but the tone began to shift. Questions emerged, framed carefully, hinting at internal developments without claiming certainty. It was the kind of attention that builds slowly, gathering momentum not through confirmation, but through consistency, the repeated sense that something beneath the surface is moving. Because ultimately, the monarchy does not operate in isolation. Its strength lies not only in tradition, but in perception, in the belief that it remains steady, cohesive, and guided by a clear sense of purpose. And when that perception begins to shift, even subtly, it can signal deeper changes taking place within. The letter, though unseen by most, already begun to influence that perception, reshaping the internal landscape in ways that could not easily be undone. Because this was never just about one letter, it was about the future of the crown itself. At its core, this unfolding situation reflects something far greater than a private message. It is, according to many observers, a quiet battle over legacy, one shaped by the enduring influence of a monarch who planned beyond her lifetime. Because the monarchy has never simply been about individuals. It has always been framed, both publicly and privately, as something larger, a sacred trust carried across generations, protected not for personal gain but for continuity, for stability, for the nation itself. And within that framework, every decision, every gesture, every silent shift takes on a meaning that extends far beyond the moment. What is happening now, beneath the surface of formal appearances, appears to reflect that deeper truth. This is not a reaction to a single document. It is a response to an idea carefully constructed, deliberately preserved, and now quietly unfolding. At the center of that unfolding stands Catherine, Princess of Wales, not through declaration, but through function. Her role, as it continues to evolve, has begun to mirror something more stabilizing, more anchoring than many had previously anticipated. She is not disrupting the structure, she is reinforcing it. Not altering tradition, but embodying it in a way that feels both steady and forward-looking. And in doing so, she becomes more than a participant. She becomes a point of balance, a figure through whom continuity can be maintained even as circumstances shift around her. For King Charles III, the situation carries a different kind of weight. His position is both defined and challenged by the moment. On one hand, he is the reigning sovereign, the authority through which the monarchy's present is expressed. On the other, he stands in the shadow of a legacy that continues to exert influence even after its origin has passed. Balancing those two forces, personal authority and inherited direction, is no simple task. It requires restraint, awareness, and a willingness to navigate complexity without allowing it to fracture the institution he now leads. And that is where the late Queen Elizabeth II's long-term vision becomes impossible to ignore. Her reign was defined by patience, by discipline, by an almost unmatched ability to think not just in years, but in decades. If the interpretations surrounding the letter hold true, then what we are witnessing now is not an unexpected disruption. but the continuation of a plan, one designed to guide the monarchy through moments of uncertainty without compromising its core identity. It is a reminder that influence does not always end with presence. Sometimes it deepens. What makes this moment particularly striking is the emerging idea of duty over hierarchy. Traditionally, authority within the monarchy has followed a clear line, one defined by rank and succession. But here, something more nuanced appears to be taking shape. Responsibility is being exercised not strictly by position, but by purpose, by who is best placed to preserve the integrity of the institution at any given time. It is a subtle shift, but one with profound implications, suggesting that the future of the crown may depend not only on who leads, but on how that leadership is supported and sustained. And beyond the palace walls, this evolution is beginning to register. Public perception, always sensitive to even the slightest changes in royal dynamics, is shifting not dramatically, but steadily. There is a growing sense that something important is unfolding, something that speaks not just to the present moment, but to the future direction of the monarchy itself. It is not yet fully understood, not clearly defined, but it is being felt. And in the end, the true power of the letter may not lie in what it said, but in what it set into motion. In the quiet aftermath, no official statement was ever released, no confirmation given. And yet, the effects of that letter continue to shape the monarchy in ways both subtle and profound. What remains most striking is not what was said publicly, but what was never said at all. Silence, in this case, became its own form of communication. No denial, no clarification, no attempt to dismantle the growing speculation. Instead, the institution carried on, outwardly unchanged, while beneath the surface, something far more deliberate continued to unfold. And within that quiet evolution, Catherine, Princess of Wales's role has begun to take on a new dimension, one that feels less like preparation and more like transition. Not abrupt, not disruptive, but steady. Purposeful, as though she is being shaped, moment by moment, into something the monarchy has already begun to rely on. Her position as future queen consort has always been understood in theory, but now it is being realized in practice, not through ceremonial declarations, but through responsibility, through presence, through the kind of quiet authority that does not need to be announced to be recognized. And this transformation, subtle as it may appear, reflects something deeper and an alignment with a vision that extends beyond the present moment. A vision that many believe was carefully constructed by Queen Elizabeth II herself, because even in absence, that influence remains unmistakable. It lingers not in memory alone, but in structure, in expectation, in the very rhythm of how the monarchy continues to function. The Queen's legacy was never confined to her reign. It was embedded into the system itself, into the decisions that would follow, the roles that would evolve, and the safeguards that would ensure continuity. The letter, whatever its full contents may be, appears to be one of those safeguards, a quiet instrument of guidance, activated not by circumstance, but by design. For King Charles III, this moment carries a different kind of significance. His reign, already defined by transition, now exists within the broader context of that enduring legacy. He is both the present and, in many ways, the bridge between what was and what will be. A monarch navigating not just the demands of leadership, but the weight of continuity, ensuring that the institution remains stable while allowing it to adapt to the realities of a changing world. It is a delicate balance, one that requires both authority and restraint, both action and acceptance. And yet, what this entire situation ultimately reveals is something far more fundamental about the monarchy itself. Its strength does not lie in rigidity, but in its ability to evolve without losing its core, to adapt without breaking, to move forward while remaining anchored in tradition. The letter, though unseen by most, has become a symbol of that balance, a reminder that the institution is guided not only by those who lead it today, but by those who shaped it long before. Because in the end, power within the House of Windsor is rarely loud. It does not always arrive with ceremony or declaration. More often, it is quiet, measured, passed carefully from one generation to the next, not just through titles, but through trust, through responsibility, through the kind of influence that does not fade with time. Because in the House of Windsor, power is not always declared, it is often inherited, protected, and quietly enforced from beyond the grave. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.